Oh, let's see. Okay, welcome everyone. Very glad you're here. Okay, wait, I'm gonna try to, wait a minute. I have to just make a couple of changes there to my settings. Welcome, welcome. All right, if we're just gonna give everybody just a minute to get situated and then we'll get started. Nice to see everybody. I can't see you, but I'm glad you're here. Okay. All right. So we're going to get started now. So I hope that those of you who are here tonight have been here for the last several weeks. And if you haven't been, you can go to testingmom.com/classes and you can watch the first 4 episodes that we did where we talked about unlocking autism. And just to let you know what we have done, if you haven't been there, is in the first week we talked about what to do after your child is diagnosed with autism. We've talked about how to help a child on the spectrum learn language and how to help a child learn reading. We've talked about how to establish a calm, productive relationship with children on the autism spectrum. And this week, we're going to kind of do a review of everything we've covered. And we are going to take the questions you've been asking that we haven't had a chance to answer from everybody. And before I share the presentation, I just want to introduce or reintroduce Dr. Marion Blank, who is the creator of the Reading Kingdom program and the ASD Reading and Language programs. She's also the author of Reading Remedy and Spectacular Bond. And she's the director of a Light on Literacy program at Columbia University in New York. And really, she's one of the top experts in the world on literacy, reading, and autism. And she publishes so many articles and she's published books. She's lectured all over the world on these topics, and we're just very happy and very honored to have her here. So welcome everyone. We're happy that you're here today. Okay, so let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to do is what we're going to do today is we are going to go over each of the topics that we've been talking about. And the first one we're going to talk about is just the key ideas for establishing a calm, productive relationship for children with ASD. But before we do this, I want to just show you a video, and then Dr. Blank is going to talk about it. And this is a baby who is hearing his mother's voice for the first time.
Because he's got a hearing impairment where they've been able to fit things into his ears.
Alex? Hi. Hello. It all sounds like it's coming from the side, so I'll put this one on. Alex? Alex? Hi. Oh, goodness me. Hello. Hello, you. That's Daddy. Was that your daddy?
That's enough.
Hello.
It shows it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. All right, so we're gonna talk through. I appreciate that you kind of put all these principles together. So if you tell us a little bit about the principles that you put together, we'll kind of go through them. And I know you've put some of people's questions with some of these ideas. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, let me just explain about that little video.
Okay.
That, in a sense, shows the essence of the problem in autism. Here is a child who's deaf. He's clearly been sensory deprived. He's never heard his mother's voice. He doesn't even know that it's his mother's voice that he's hearing. He just hears his mother's voice. There's no sense of shock. There's no sense of dismay. There's no sense of disappointment. There is just pleasure. And this is how the normal infant is born. The neurotypical infant is born keen to relate. They're keen to be touched. They're keen to touch. They're keen to hear voices, and they're keen to produce their own voices. They're keen to see the face, and they're keen to show their face. That is what is not present or is very warped or has serious difficulties. And that's why the relationship doesn't develop. And this poses enormous problems for parents. Parenting is hard to begin with, but when you have a child who can't read you, and when he does read you, he finds you confusing and overwhelming, you've got an enormous problem to face. Now, people talk about getting the relationship, and in large measure, based on different theories, but in large measure, for example, ABA has told people the basis of a relationship is physical rewards, that the reason a baby likes his mother is because he gets milk from his mother. That is absolutely not the case. The baby needs all those physical things, but that is not the way the relationship is based in neurotypical children, and it is not the base for relating in children with autism. So what happens is you've got to find a way of interacting successfully. And what we've got to do is understand the biological factors. By the way, I want to mention, I won't be answering too many specific questions here because there really were core issues around which most of the questions were based. And a vast percentage of the questions about the relationship were based upon the failure of the relationship. It wasn't phrased that way. For example, one mother said, "My child will do things with me only when I give him raspberries. Can I change this behavior?" In other words, she's made the relationship, as she's been told, to be dependent on physical things, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be very restricted. So what the parents are really saying is they almost can't envision a solid, calm relationship. They've not experienced it, and they don't know how to bring it about, and they're very wary. I've had a lot of the questions where I can't get my child to do this. I can't get my child to attend. How can I make my child interested? And what they were basically saying is, I don't have a relationship where I have any powers to guide my child. All the power has been ceded to the child, who decides what he wants, when he wants it. The parents follow it because it brings some calm to the situation, but it prepares the child and the family for a very restricted life. Means the child will not do anything for other people. And I'll describe a very, and one of the things, I won't go over these points, we discussed them. They're going to be available to people to print off, so they're available. But recently I was called into a teenage boy who had been very quiet in school, but as he became a teenager, he became much more rambunctious and began fighting the system. This is a very common thing because as the kids get bigger, the sort of quiet resistance can become overt. And what happened was they blamed it on the hormones. And they said, well, his hormones have kicked in and he's impossible. And I went to the home, and I was talking to the parents, and they were on a couch with me. And the boy came in, and he says to his mother, move for me. So she immediately, there were 6 other chairs he could sit on. She immediately got up and moved for him. And I said, why are you doing that? She says, he asked so nicely. I said, but there was no reason for him to ask this. You were sitting quietly. You stay where you're sitting, and let's see what happens. Well, he went into a full-blown tantrum. And we saw what they never see at home, but they see in school all the time, is he wasn't getting what he wanted. And he then goes into a full-blown rage. And so what happens is, and this is a very common pattern, the parents adjust to the child. These parents, because he had been so difficult as a youngster, we're so happy he was saying his request nicely now. So the mother said, but he said it so nicely. But the point is, the parents are constantly adapting to the child. The child will never give that privilege to the parents. The child never adapts to the parents. So the parents were shocked to see this acting out behavior, which they never see at home, which the school sees all the time. But the reason they don't see it at home is they're constantly adapting to the child. And I'm going to be saying this over and over again tonight. If you do not make your child a willing responder for reasonable demands, you can teach him nothing. And that's a hard message, but it's a powerful message. So for example, people say, he doesn't like doing this. How can I get him to do it? The child has to, as part of life, be willing to work for 10 or 15 minutes. It'd be one thing if you make him work for 6 or 7 hours. That's kind of brutal. But you have the right, and should have the right, and it's essential that you have the right, that for 10 or 15 minutes, you can put him into a situation which is well constructed. He understands it. He doesn't have to love it. You cannot make a child love every behavior. He's got to be willing to go along with it because it's part of adapting to life. And so the issue, and the parents, after years of not doing this, find this very hard adjustment to make. They think it's cruel. They think it's harsh. It's alien to them. And they're fearful. Many parents have told me, and it used to shock me at first, it doesn't anymore, how afraid they are of their child. I remember one child who did extremely well in the end, but the first few months were very rough. And I said to the parent, why did you take so long to do it? He says, I was so afraid to touch my child. He says, you just held him and did what you wanted. He says, I couldn't imagine. He said, I was terrified this child would fall apart. And there are other parents who have other feelings, but the point is, because the child comes into the world with a very different set of equipment, the parent is not prepared for this child, adapts techniques that actually work against the child, and become very worried when they actually make efforts to control the child. So a number of the parents wrote, how do you do the hold and release? And I can't show it here, but basically it's you just always keep the child's body balanced, but you just control the parts of his body that are doing the thing you don't want him to do. So for example, take the child opening and closing a door. You have two possibilities there. You can actually just stand against the door, hold it, so the child can't move it. And he'll be struggling to move it, but it doesn't matter. You don't even have to hold the child. You're holding the door. You're preventing the action. The alternative is you can take the child's hands, sort of, and just hold them up. If the child starts kicking, then you put your legs around his legs. In other words, you prevent the child from doing the mildly destructive action, and you only release it when you get some sense that it's eased. And then he immediately starts again, so you immediately impose again. And usually, within 15 or 20 minutes, you see a marked change because the child sees a very clear situation. Now, it would be easier for me or a teacher to do it because the child is not accustomed to us doing what the parents do. It's somewhat harder for the parents, not only psychologically, but because they're changing the patterns. And the child's basically saying, why are you changing the pattern? I'm still the same kid. And you can't explain it, but he just gets used to it. It's sort of like the 20-day rule on a diet. You know, after 20 days, it sort of becomes a part of you. So you make it a part. Now, the thing, the enormous gain you get from it is a tremendous sense in the child. My goodness, my parents are calm and in control, and that feels good. Temple Grandin describes it. She talks about how tough her mother was on her, but how vital it was. So if you're not willing and able to bring about a willing responder, parents always want initiation. How can I get my child to converse? How can I get him to play with other children? You have one main goal, and that if you had one goal to pick, it is that you make the child willing to meet the demands of those around him when they are part of the reasonable set of demands that people face. So those are the main points I want to. Now, can we show the video? Do we have the video of the little boy? I just want to show that.
This one.
Not this boy, yes, this one. And I want to show you this because it really covers an important point.
Okay. Let me see if I can get it going.
He's 2 years of age. He cries a lot. And when he does speak, he had some language, he speaks gibberish. And he's just very difficult to live with. You're not understanding him because he can't be understood. He just mumbles a lot of things.
Everybody,
Now here's the mother reading a story to him.
Here is a boy.
here is a boy.
He is on a pony.
He's on a pony.
He is on a pony.
He is on a pony. Pony.
He wants to get down,
He wants to get down,
but he is little.
but he is little.
He cannot reach the ground.
He cannot reach the ground.
The man is looking.
The man is looking.
Excuse me. The man wants to help.
The man wants to help.
He has a stool.
He has a stool.
He puts the stool here.
He puts the stool here.
The boy is watching.
The boy is watching.
He can step on the stool.
He can step on the stool.
Then he can get off.
Then he can get off.
The stool worked.
Stool worked.
The boy could get down.
The boy could get down.
Boy could get down.
The boy could get down.
The boy could get down.
The boy could get
Could.
It's so hard.
The boy.
No.
Repeat this. The boy
The boy.
could get down.
The boy. It's so difficult.
The boy could get down.
The boy
Could.
could get down.
There you go. Let's say the whole thing now. The boy could get down.
The boy could get down.
Excellent. Now he is off the pony.
And now he's off the pony.
The man helped the boy.
The man helped the boy.
The boy likes the man.
The boy like the man.
He is thanking him.
He is thanking him.
Right. No. A boy could not get off the pony. A man brought over a stool. The boy got off and thanked the man. So that's what the story was about. Now, we will do that again. This time you will fill in some words. A boy could not get off the
Pony.
Okay, a man brought over a
Stool.
yeah. The boy got off and thanked the
Man.
that's
We can
great.
stop. There's more, but we can stop. because I really have one main point to show here, not just his progress, but do you see when he says, it's difficult, I don't want to do it? The thing that we have to recognize is, because people say to me, you know, you make these kids so well behaved, they're better behaved than neurotypical kids. And I say, because these kids have a very hard road to follow. They have to learn all kinds of things that other children find easy. And they have to have tolerance for tolerating difficulty. And so when you the first steps on inhibiting the acting out behavior and so on are the first steps in teaching him to tolerate the difficulties that he's going to master. If you do not build up this frustration tolerance, the child cannot learn. And it is now, he really gets past it. He's getting past it. It didn't take more than a few seconds. The difficulties are not endless and impossible, but they are absolutely critical and handling them is absolutely critical if the children are to learn. So that, and this, I tell you, you know, based on my experience, this is the hardest part that parents have. After that, everything is programmed, everything is easy. Well, much easier in any event. And it's all done. I mean, you do a lot to help the child. You simplify the world, you reduce commands, you reduce a lot of demands. For example, I got a lot of questions like, can I use play as an adult-led session? No, you can't use play as an adult-led session, because if the child wants to play, it has to be a child-led session. If you want the child to play, that's not the child wanting to play. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but of all the sessions you want to lead the child to, that may not be one of the most productive. So, but that's because the idea of play is such a nice idea. But play is a nice idea if the child comes up with it in his child-led session. If you want to make it part of your adult-led session, you'd have to justify it. It's not terrible, but you might be giving up a chance to teach language. You might be giving up a chance to teach reading. You might be giving up a chance to teach lots of other things. The good news on this is what people kept saying in their questions, why don't you show more videos? And I understand they'd like to see more videos, but it wouldn't matter if I showed 100 videos of success, because that's no guarantee it'll be success for your child. The thing I do have to offer, and I think it's important, I'm sort of proud of it, is that if this program is right, meaning you can do it and it's good for your child, and I've done a good job in presenting it, you will see dramatic changes in 3 months. You will not have to go for an evaluation. You won't have to do testing. You will have a different child. Just like that little boy who starts out and spends his days crying. His parents were absolutely miserable. Their day was horrible because they didn't know when he was going to start his crying session. 8 months later, he's a charming little kid who can go to regular kindergarten, to a regular preschool, because he's got all the behaviors needed. He doesn't have to be with other children on the spectrum. He can be with much more normal peers. And so the gains can be enormous. And also the good news is, if you do this in children under 6 and maintain it for a year, they never lose it. They may have some difficult periods. They may have an illness that throws them back a little, but they never, if you maintain this for a year, these children have it for a lifetime. Okay, so that's our section on this. Are there any questions on the behavior, Karen?
Let me see if this question, okay. It says here, during the behavioral program period, what should the kid be doing when he is not having exchanges? If exchanges are about 15 minutes per hour, then what would the expectation be for the child to do the rest of the time?
Well, if that's what's in there'll be minimal exchange where he's just with you. There'll be just going out to the park kind of thing where you just have physical activity and it's a relief. There will be lots of small exchanges that are part of daily life. Taking a bath, having your meals, getting prepared for the car. So you start looking at everyday life as having a lot of interaction. And that's the interaction. And also what's very important is the child being alone in his room. and learning to tolerate being alone and learning to tolerate that he doesn't always have to be stimulated. We have so stressed stimulation for the children that it's really counterproductive.
Okay. And the next question is about reading, so I'm going to wait till we get we're on that section. So it is, if anyone else has a behavioral question, let me know. Okay. Do you advise quiet sitting before reading or language for a 2-year-old?
Quiet sitting is great. And if it can be done 2 or 3 times a day, you're dealing in 2 and 3 minute, 4-minute periods, but it's an excellent activity before a focused activity. So if you can do it, it's fine.
Okay. I don't know. I think this is behavioral as well. How can you help the child be more independent with homework and initiating conversations? This is a 12-year-old.
We're not going. First of all, we're not going to go in.
Right.
Yeah, but we're not going into. First of all, initiating conversation is something a child may never achieve. This is a big issue that goes beyond the issues we've talked about. But being an effective initiator in very complicated social situations is probably the most difficult skill for a child with autism, and they may never achieve it. Independent activity, that's something that has to be trained very carefully. We don't have the time, but it has the same principles that I talked about here.
Okay.
It just gets a little too complicated to go into the specifics of it, but if they're, depending on the program they're doing, there'll be suggestions made as to what to do.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll go on to the next
Sure.
section. What's the main difference between this approach and ABA? Can you use unlocking language can we build it into our ABA program?
Well, let's do that in the next segment on language.
On language, okay, got it.
Okay.
And then we do have this. I wanted to.
Yeah, this is great because I saw it recently. This is now in general education, which I thought was not. Changing a child's behavior starts with changing adult behavior. That's been my message. In other words, if you don't change your behavior, the child's behavior is not going to change. And so they're recognizing the power of classroom management. They're talking about these, it won't be identical techniques, but it's that the teacher has to set up the power of the relationship in order to teach. And we need to do the same thing for the children with autism. And it just hasn't been recognized. And huge numbers of articles are written about follow the child's lead, which is really a very questionable technique. Following the child's lead is like the boy I told you who said, please get up to his mother. And the mother adapts to it, but the school does not adapt to it. The world does not adapt to it. And he never adapts to anybody making demands on him. So it's never reciprocal. That has to change, or else the child really will never be able to have successful relationships.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so working on the behavior, but so us as adults have to change, we as adults have to change in order to help the child change their behavior and create a calmer home.
Yes.
That's our job as
Yeah.
a parent. Okay. Okay, so we've got 10 ideas here, and we're going to be talking about enhancing language. So if you have questions about language, you can put them in the Q&A box, and we'll talk about language.
Okay. And I'll raise the ABA questions in a little while. I just wanted to stress certain things. First of all, there's a term, I hope it gets changed, called nonverbal children. There are no nonverbal children. It's a terrible moniker. Basically, we know that the figures aren't good, but about 25% of children with autism never talk. They are called nonverbal. All of them can respond to commands. So obviously they have language. They're just not speaking. And the other thing is that all of them, maybe there's a few who can't, but in my experience, all of them can learn written language. and they are highly verbal. So I think that's been a terrible term to use, and it's held up the teaching of language enormously. It's funny, I have a test, well known, it's internationally used, called Preschool Language Assessment Instrument. And one of the things we did, and it goes into levels of difficulty, and one of the things we've done is design it, my co-authors Sue Rose and Laura Berlin, we designed it so that you can use only receptive language, meaning the child only has to act, and you can get a sense of the child's full verbal repertoire, even if he doesn't say a word. So this is something I've been working on for a long time. Now, if you take most programs, and if you say, now, by the way, if a child is basically nonverbal and has a few verbal approximations, like b and m and things of that sort, and you keep asking him for language, it is very, very, very counterproductive. Now, that's one of the main demands of many ABA programs, that child will be doing verbal approximations for 4 and 5 years. It is something, in my view, that is really detrimental to progress, and it never leads to language. Now, the other thing is that if the child is verbal, what many programs start with, including ABA, is a lot of questions. And when people are asking, how is my program different? Questions are the hardest form of language to respond to. We have 3 forms of language. This is what I was talking about earlier in the previous sessions. We have commands, like pick up your coat, go to the door, give me my shoes. You've got statements like it is raining, or here's a toy, or oh, the coffee is hot. And you have questions. What are you holding? What is the boy doing? And so on. You need a lot of precursor skills to build up to effective question answering. And ABA never does that. And I'm just pointing out a few of the differences. The other thing is that I teach a lot, and we can move down on the slide. I teach a lot about the structures of language. If you do not have a noun-verb system, a pretty decent noun-verb system. Nouns are things like objects. They don't have to be, but you know, cup, and it could be a person, boy, it could be plurals, dogs, it could be cats, it could be pencils. So those are nouns. Those are the sort of things in the world. And then you've got verbs, the actions, drink and sit and eat and move and go and write and so on. It just so happens that if you're going to talk about more than one, it is in the noun category. That's where it exists. So it could be boy or boys. You can say a boy or some boys. And if you're in verbs, that describes tenses. That describes time in English. So if you say the boy is going, it's very different from the boy was going, and that's different from the boy will be going. So very key ideas that are central to the ideas you're going to communicate are based on knowing the structures of the language. If any parent will go through an ABA curriculum, they will see there is almost no work whatsoever on verbs. And if you do not have verbs, you do not have a language system. There's a lot else that goes into a language system, but I'm trying to show. So what ABA fails to do is provide the structures that the child needs. Then there's the issue of the communication and the issue of being a responder versus being an initiator. You cannot make someone an initiator despite all the work that's written. And the only thing ABA can do, and a lot of other programs, is make the child say, I want. That's the one form. It's not real initiation, but it's the one form of almost initiation that they can get. It never transfers to anything else. You can make, so in other words, ABA has not given sufficient consideration to the communication parameters of language. That the one thing we can do is make a child an effective responder. And an effective responder has enormous power. If a child's an effective responder, he can be mainstreamed in school. If a child's an effective responder, he can learn to read because reading is responding. It's taking in the message from someone else. If a child is an effective responder, he can understand the language that he's hearing around him. So what my system does is it focuses on how do you get the structures in. Now, one of the interesting techniques is the only way, autistic children are known to use 1 and 2 word answers. Parents will say, well, he uses 1 to 2 word answers all the time. In order to use language effectively, you've got to have long responses. And there's only one way to do it. Nobody else but me does it. It's imitation. If you get the child to imitate longer and longer utterances, their language improves enormously. It's not because this is a wonderful technique. It's because it's the only technique. And so imitation has never been used effectively. It is an enormously powerful technique, which allows the child to figure out how to express complex ideas. And people will say, oh, it's just imitation. Believe me, I wish I could do it now. I used to be able to. If I gave you a 10-word sentence in French to imitate now, and you did not know French, there's no way you could imitate that 10-word sentence. You could do 1 word, lait, meaning milk, or café, meaning coffee, or jolie, meaning pretty. But if you heard a 10-word sentence with those, you couldn't imitate it. So when you can start imitating complex sentences, that's a huge step up in language. So basically, what unlocking language does, the parent doesn't have to figure any of this out. It's all done for them in the program. But I'm explaining sort of why the program is the way it is. So we teach commands first, then we teach statements the kids imitate, then we intermix them. And then we add questions. And when you have commands, questions, and statements all in a kind of little conversation, it sounds like natural language. It is not quite natural language, but it sounds like natural language, and it allows the child to begin to understand regular language and begin to speak normal language. So it's enormously powerful. And what's very important, which parents often don't do, is to then use these forms in everyday exchange, not just the teaching session. Now, one of the things is most ABA content doesn't fit into daily life. How many green triangles can you talk about? There's endless, what is the color of the triangle? What's the color of the car? That isn't regular language. But if you're at the table and you say, what are we eating? And the child says, we're eating spaghetti, it sounds fine. If you say, over there are some apples, please bring them over here, it sounds fine. If you're saying something like, say, these apples are really big, and he says, these apples. So in other words, it's language that the child realizes applies to life. And that is a huge step in helping the child make the transfer to real life. So a lot of time and effort have gone into figuring out how do we best get the child, how much structure can we give the child to help him master these vital forms of language? Oh, I want to mention, several parents sort of didn't understand what I was saying about I want. One parent said, well, if I make it say it in a long, complex sentence, is that better? No, it's not that. You do not want the child saying I want. It is not a productive route. One mother said, well, if I don't answer her, she'll just keep asking me it over and over and not stopping. That's not quite accurate. The child's going to stop. If you actually look at a child, he says, I want ice cream or something, and you go, not now. That child may say I want ice cream 10 times, might say it 15 times, might say it 25. He's going to stop, though, at a certain point. If you do not get responded to, you no longer keep speaking about it. And the I want patterns do nothing to serve the child. And they dominate the language exchange with very little gain. So those are the issues of how to teach language. What age can it be begun? It can start as young as 2. Now people have written, can I do this with a 19-year-old? As long as the 19-year-old is willing, remember, a willing responder, Yes, you could do it in any. I've taught many adults, but they were all willing to do it. If you have a 19-year-old who is ornery and says, basically, I'm not doing this, there's nothing I can do at that age. They're big, they're strong, they're determined. And if they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it. That's why it's so helpful to start when they're young. But if you've got willing responder, you can do it in any age. Okay, are there any questions on this?
Let me see. Let's see. That's about.
Oh, by the way, in terms of using it with ABA, what I tell parents is if the ABA is done in the school, it's not ideal because ABA language, in my view, is not an ideal language system to teach children. It is very, for example, and we'll discuss this more in a few minutes, they don't teach the non-content words. They intentionally leave out words like the and is and so on because they say it complicates things for the child. If you do not have non-content words, you don't have language. But if the child knows in school he does ABA and at home he does something different, you can manage it. Is it ideal? No, but it's manageable. It's far better to use the same system at home and school, but you can coexist if need be. So I wanted to answer that question. It came up quite a bit.
Okay, and can the ASD unlocking language be used if a child has specific articulation issues, like not being able to say the R sound?
Well, the thing, as long as the speech is clear enough that you're not saying to them, what'd you say? What you cannot work effectively in spoken language if you're constantly saying to the child, I don't hear you. It's not going to work. But if the articulation is clear enough that you know what the child's saying, it's fine.
Okay.
We don't need perfect articulation. It's just that when a child has very poor articulation, he or she ends up being very uncomfortable with people because they're constantly asking for repetition. What'd you say? What'd you say? And what they end up doing is not talking.
In the method of imitation, how do you handle situations when a child gets stuck on being able to imitate, let's say a 7-word sentence, but then it has a very hard time with an 8-word sentence?
Well, that's all built into the program, but you saw it with what the mother did there.
Yeah.
And he says it's difficult. He knew it was harder. She needed like 4 trials. I mean, if you're going to be doing 20 trials to get it, you know it's too hard. But if you basically, you break it down, put it together, break it down, put it together, and you give the child, let's say 4 or 5 of those experiences within a 20-minute session where the others are easier, it's fine. So in other words, it's very different from ABA. Once they've done something hard, we don't ask it to be repeated, which in ABA they say, well, let's make sure he really did it. We never ask it to be repeated in that session. We then go to something easier. So we basically say, okay, we're going to take you to something hard now. You did it, fine. Let's go back to something easier. So this is all built into the program. The parents are told what to do. And basically, and it'll say, if you are stuck at this level, go back a level or give up the program for a month or whatever. But mostly, it will be 4 or 5 repetitions on the hard things and you move the child. I'll give you one other thing. Sometimes as things get more developed, I had one boy who could not get to 5 words. He was good at reading, could not get to 5-word sentences. And I wrote out a sentence for him. He read it. Now in reading, you're reading 1 word at a time. I then covered it and I said, now what was it? And he closed his eyes. You could see that he was looking at the sentence in his head and he got it. And then we got him over the 5. And once we got that, we could move ahead. So there are a lot of techniques and they're all in the book.
Okay. And the last question before we move on to reading is it okay to give them what he wants sometimes if he
Oh, of course.
requests in a good way?
Not when he requests in a good way.
Not when
you give him, no, because the issue, it is very hard for an autistic child to differentiate between when you will give it to him and when you won't give it to him. You make his life much easier to say, well, I'll never get when I ask for it. But he regularly gets it because you're a nice parent and you give him what he likes. But just like people will try and teach autistic children which strangers they can talk to and which strangers they cannot talk to. Those are very hard discriminations for children with social problems. So I just teach them not to talk to strangers, period. That, and we won't go into how I do it, but the point is that's much easier for the child. Then if the parent goes over to the stranger and talks, the child knows he's then permitted to do that as well. What we think of as being nice is often making life harder for the child with autism.
Okay. All right, let's talk about reading. Some of the big ideas that people had questions about, and by the way, everybody, you will be able to download this presentation on testingmom.com/classes. It will be there, and you can download it.
Okay, now reading, I'm still constantly amazed, partly because I love reading. And I don't mean I just love reading a book. I think reading is such a fabulous resource. And not only that, it is such a resource that the kids with autism love. Even if they don't start out loving it, most of them do. But their parents will tell you all the time they're attracted to books. They like turning the pages. There's something about books that are wonderful for them. And it's such a fabulous resource. And I've had parents say, I'd rather use a PEC system, or I'd rather use an augmentative device, or I'd rather use sign language. And I'm thinking, I don't understand it. I just don't. Because if you have reading and writing, you can do it with anyone. It's not just your parent. If you have reading and writing, you can do it in school. If you have reading and writing, you can do it even with friends who are more tolerant of things. If you have reading and writing, you can do it with strangers. Reading and writing is just such an available, fabulous skill. And we are not using it. I cannot understand why. There are many, and parents should read them. There's some beautiful books written by non-speaking autistic adults who write their experiences in brilliant, wonderful prose. They're fabulous in writing. So the thing is, basically, if we would accept reading and writing, the term nonverbal would totally disappear, because these children, reading and writing can do everything that speaking and listening can do. And so it's a fabulous system with major resources. Now with computers and so on, it's so easy. Now people have said, do they have to handwrite? I like them to handwrite. It adds a lot of strength in a lot of ways. Handwriting demands a lot of attention and develops some very good skills, but it's not essential. If a child has major difficulties with handwriting, all of it can be accomplished with keyboarding or touchscreen. So I like handwriting, it's useful, but it's not absolutely essential. But writing is essential. And one of the things that has amazed me, and so again, I sound like a broken record on, the children have to be willing responders. When parents say to me, he doesn't like sitting with ASD reading, what can I make him do? You have to have established the responding first. So you saw it in that little boy. He's crying initially. He cried to everything. 8 months later, he can sit with his mother and focus on a task. And he knows when it's done, he's left, he can go. He completed it well. His language is improving. His mother can manage it very well because everything is programmed. And he accepts it. He accepts it not because it's the funnest thing in the world, but it's doable, and his mother wants him to do it, and it goes, okay, that's what you want. Now, one of the things that's quite amazing, now again, I told you, if a child is a willing responder, within 2 months, you are going to see dramatic changes in whatever you're teaching. And you saw it in that little boy. The changes are incredibly noticeable and generally very fast. And one of the interesting things that I found, I wish we could do research on it. Nobody is willing to support it. I'll wait for that's New York City sirens. I'll wait. I wish this could be reading. In reading, children with autism show better skills than in speaking. And it's a fabulous tool for extending their language, and no one is studying it. And parents should be screaming for it, but only if your kids are willing responders, because if your children are not willing responders, they're not going to learn to read. They're not going to learn to do anything. Now, literacy has been massively neglected and with autism for several reasons. One is a traditional reading requires phonics, and the autistic children cannot do that. Now, people say to me, why can't you do phonics? Why aren't you using phonics? Well, I'll give you why, a few reasons. For example, most words in English cannot be sounded out. Only a very tiny percentage of words in English can be sounded out. So what happens is the children have to learn a bunch of complex verbal rules, like the silent E rule. So if you have CAP, C-A-P, you have a short A. But if you have an E at the end, now listen, think of what you're saying to the autistic child. You have the E at the end. Now the E doesn't say anything. It is silent, but it goes back to the vowel in front of it, and it makes that vowel long. Now, if you have a child who 1 and 2 word formulations, do you think he's going to understand that? It's ludicrous to try and apply phonic rules to the children. In addition, nowadays, they have a system called phonological awareness, where for 2 years, the children have to analyze the sounds of words. Like you have to say to the child, well, here's the word land. Now, if we left off the L, what do we have? Can you imagine doing that with autistic children for 2 years? Phonics doesn't work for anyone, by the way. And I know people will think I'm insane to say that, but it really doesn't. We have a 60% failure rate in this country, having used phonics for hundreds of years. Ben Franklin objected to phonics back in the 1700s. People have objected to it. We have the highest. English is not a language that lends itself to simple phonics. So most children don't learn to read in our country, which is a disaster. But for children with autism, it is just impossible. Now, another thing is there's the belief that the child must speak before he reads, which is totally not true. And there will also be that the people who are in power in the teaching of children with autism know very little about reading. So put it all together and they just don't care about reading for children with autism. Now, one of the things also about the program, which is very different from phonics and very different from any other program, is I talked about this last week, the little word 2 weeks ago, the little words matter. Words like the and is and of and they and so on. Now, do you have the clip from Edmark? It was
Yes.
Can you just show that?
I do. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me, you said to start at 140, so.
Yeah. Now, Edmark, people ask, well, how is your program different from Edmark? Because Edmark uses sight words. I don't use sight words. I use individual words, but with deep, intense analysis. So here, he's being given nouns, so he circles it. He's got several wrong, but he's a child with autism. But he's having some trouble. But I want to show you what happens next.
That's a horse.
Now here he gets with. Now what he gets is the letters, W-I-T-H. He has to put them in the right place. And then he gets a worksheet with about 20 withs on it.
The words.
So that's a whole word,
All the words.
teaching.
But the
Is
letters.
there a smidgen of teaching of what the word means? No. And so people say, "What? How is my program?" I mean, there are a lot of ways in which my program is different from Edmark, but here's one of the first ones: that they use the sight words that I use, or the whole words that I use, but they never teach the child the meaning. And if you do not teach the meaning of with, the child will not understand what with means. So just because, unfortunately, the labels in the field are so weak. So people say, well, I use sight words. But you have to go beyond that and see what teaching is really going on. And the teaching in Edmark that's going on does not teach the language that the children need. I'll give you one other example. In Edmark, some of the early books used, I see a red horse. I see a green horse. I see a yellow horse. It's predictable text. Now, who is the I? There's a little boy looking at the horse in the picture. So who is the I that sees the horse? The child with autism is supposed to know that it's the boy in the picture who's saying, I see the horse. It is well known that children with autism have enormous difficulty with first and second person words like I and you. And so what Edmark does is floods them with what they can't do in terms of meaning. Good teaching in reading requires very careful control of hundreds of variables, and that is almost never done. Now, people have asked me, is there comprehension? There not only is ASD reading designed to teach comprehension, but it goes also available are programs like Steps to Stories that you saw the little boy doing. There's Story Smarts, there's Spelling. We have a whole bunch of programs that accompany ASD reading that also teach comprehension. And this week, fortunately, they're all on sale. So if people are interested, they can go to the ASD reading site and get these additional programs at a discount. So I think that covers the.
Okay. Yeah, I have more questions that people have asked. So let me
Sure.
get to some of the questions. But the one thing that you've said is that to become that it's the number one thing first is to help your child become a willing responder.
Yeah.
And that you would learn how to do by reading Spectacular Bond. That's
Yes.
right. It's not in the other programs, it's in Spectacular Bond, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
Okay, so let me look for programs about reading, okay? And I know there are some. Okay, so ASD reading stops at the 3rd grade level. Will the program be expanded to more grades?
There is a program on Reading Kingdom called Reading Kingdom 2. We're talking about ways to expand it now. I have to do it first for neurotypical kids, and then it will be done for children with autism. It's it's going to take quite a bit of work. And this is where we are at this point. We keep going, and we hope to do more, but it takes time.
How do you teach kids inferences as part of reading comprehension?
That's great, because one of the things, there are a number of ways, but one of the key that is, and I mentioned it last time or in a previous talk, one of the keys to inferencing is that children must recognize that sentences connect. We do a lot of work nobody talks about this, but we do a lot of work in our design of the material, which teach that sentences connect. It's hard for people to believe that children can't do this because it seems so obvious. So for example, you could say, gee, that tree is very pretty. And then the next sentence could be, the lady planted it here 2 years ago. Or that tree is very pretty, and my grandfather has a fur coat in Russia. Now, hard as it may be to believe, a child who does not have the language needed for reading does not see that one set of sentences connects and the other doesn't. Nobody puts time into this. And I won't go here. There are good reasons why they don't see the connection, but you cannot do inferencing until you can do sentence connections. So that's one key. And then the other thing is that we do a lot of modeling in Steps to Stories and Story Smarts, which teaches inferencing. I can't tell you more right now, but, and we want to do more in that realm. But we need to design the material very carefully. But if you could ask hundreds of teachers who are teaching autistic children, what is the role of sentence connections in text, and they won't be able to answer you because no one has ever even mentioned it to them. So there are huge gaps in the teaching of reading because of the failure of the professionals to educate the training staff who need to do the teaching. It's a very serious problem, and we're trying to address it. So I can't give you a full answer, but that covers some of it.
That's part of it. Okay. Let's see. It says here, My son has been in an ABA program at school and also at home. He's now 12 and he doesn't write, read, or speak. He has few spoken words and he mainly communicates to request what he wants
Of course.
with an augmented communication device. I started ASD Unlocking Language and ASD Reading. I'm also reading Spectacular Bond and I want to follow the program. I still have ABA home program. Should I stop ABA home program and switch over?
Well, I think what you do, this is what I advise any parent. If you're trying my programs, try them and see if you think they're working for you. And if they are, then I would get rid of ABA at home.
Okay.
But if you're not going to find my programs helpful, then, and you find ABA gives you some support, stick with ABA.
Okay.
But you see, you've got to try. Now, if her child is not speaking, and I get the impression that he isn't speaking very much,
That's what it says.
she should be doing speaking sounds before unlocking language. And if she can't do speaking sounds, then she can't do unlocking language, but she can do ASD reading. ASD reading can be done whether the child speaks or not. Unlocking language can't be done. Well, when a child becomes a fluent reader, I do unlocking language through reading, but I won't go into that right now. So the thing is, if a child is basically at very unclear 1 and 2 word utterances, I would do speaking sounds first. But if he's doing 2 and 3 word utterances reasonably well, you can do unlocking language.
Okay. Okay. My 10-year-old was an early reader and he used to love it and did really good. But around 3 or 4 years ago, he started not liking it anymore and his progress on reading stopped. Any ideas about what may have happened?
No, I'd have to see the child and do
Yeah.
an evaluation. My hunch, but it's is that he got into higher and higher level material that he could understand. One of the things that's very hard for people to realize, that hyperlexic children do not read for the sake of reading. They read for the sake of solving a visual puzzle. They look at it's as if you did a Sudoku or something. You look at it and you say, gee, that's interesting. There's the word hexachlorophene. That's the first. The reason I mentioned that is I saw a 4-year-old hyperlexic decades ago, and he was reading the New York Times, and it had hexachlorophene in the title. It was a cleanser that was being abandoned. And what they do, they see it like a kind of chess game. Isn't this interesting? But they don't look for meaning. So he may have, I have no idea, he may have gotten to the point where they began asking for comprehension, and he couldn't do that because no one taught him comprehension. So she probably will have to go back and really start ensuring comprehension.
I see. And your books, Story Smarts, or which might be a place to start with?
Well, Steps to Stories can be done with or without reading, and that's where I start the simplest level of comprehension. And it's hard for people to realize that the children cannot connect the meaning of 2 different pictures that relate to one another. So connections and linkages between parts of language is very hard and something that we do a lot of, and it's very powerful.
Okay. So is the hand support technique the same as facilitated communication?
Not at all. Well, first of all, facilitated communication was the idea. You hold the hand, you supposedly don't guide it, and you let the child write. And what they found when they did it was the kids wrote all about sexual abuse and how their lives had been messed up and people began saying, well, maybe not. So they gave the same children to people who didn't know what the child was supposed to write, and they got nothing. So then the whole technique was thrown out. Unfortunately, facilitated communication put the field behind by decades because of what they were doing. Facilitated communication doesn't go into, does the child want to write? How is he writing? What is a common technique is hand over hand. And that means you take the child's hand and you move it to make the letter A. We don't do that. With hand support, we just support the hand and the child has to move it to make the letter A. So facilitated communication is a whole other thing. based on the fact that the children are assumed to have this huge verbal base inside them, and that if you hold their hand, they'll express it. And I don't want to go into the controversies about it. It's very complicated. But they gave hand support such a bad name that no one will support a child's hand. And that is a disaster because the children do need hand support. They'll tell you, the children who have a lot of insight, they'll say, I can't get the motor movement started. I need the support. And sometimes it's quite amazing. Again, it's not studied. We had one child, and other people have told me similar stories, where we gradually removed the hand support, we moved it to the elbow, and then finally, the mother just had to put her finger on his shoulder. And you say, well, what? I mean, it can't possibly help. It did. He could not write if the mother's finger wasn't on it, and she was clearly not giving him any cues at that point. And the children will tell you about their motor problem. This is an area that desperately needs more research. And it's not research because the people who sort of got involved in the field weren't at all interested in that part of autism.
Okay. Okay, so my daughter's 12. She's a willing responder, but I'm overwhelmed. Where and how would you recommend I begin the program with her?
Well, I think she should write down a schedule and say, what hours does she have available?
Mm-hmm.
She should, how old is the daughter, did she say?
12.
She should aim for at least an hour of instruction a day. With an hour of instruction, she'll get a lot accomplished. 2 hours is max anyway. So if she wants to do reading, that'll take between 15 and 30 minutes. If she wants to do speaking, it'll take between 15 and 30 minutes. So she has to decide which program she wants. If the child is speaking but not speaking well, I would definitely go there with Unlocking Language, because when you give tools of speaking to a child, it just makes their life so much easier. I mean, reading is great, but it's a heck of a lot easier to speak. So if this child is capable of learning to speak, I would probably start with 2 programs. And then I would make a schedule for the day to make sure she gets physical exercise and that her meals are, handled well. And that's all. You don't have to, and then when that's working well, then she can add another thing. But if she keeps it even to an hour a day for months, but she's doing it well, she's going to get great results. She does not have to do it all.
One step at a time.
One step at a time.
Right. Okay. My son is 31 months and he's having speech and special ed teacher over for over 6 months, I guess. He does develop language, like he says words, but does not make a lot of connections. And he's been diagnosed as autistic and ABA is recommended. Since he's not 3 yet, he won't be able to start school. Can your program help him? His attention span has improved a lot, like it's maybe 30 to 45 minutes.
It sounds like it would, but without knowing more.
Try.
Very often, see, if you get into steady routines with the kids, which is what ABA does, it looks like they're willing responders, but they're not. All you have to do is change the task and the kids blow up. So you have to make sure that the child's a willing responder, meaning that you can make changes in the routine. For example, those are some of the signs. Let's say the child's eating at a certain place in the table. You can say, today I want you to sit on this chair. And he said, oh, you do? Okay, let's do it. But if you get a screaming fit, that means he's not a willing responder. In other words, we don't want him responding just to rigid routines. We want him able to respond to reasonable variations in the routine. If that's happening, yeah, he'd do very well with the program.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Which of your programs works on learning how to connect sentences?
Unlocking Language and ASD reading,
Okay.
and Steps to Stories.
Okay. If a child is echolalic, how do we do ASD pre-speaking?
Well, you have to get the willing responder, which
First.
means you get him to inhibit the echolalia when you don't want it. I do not control the child's echolalia when he's doing it on his own. In other words, if he's going around the room, going, speak to the mic, whatever, he's heard something on TV, fine, he's not bothering anyone. But if he's working with me, he can't, with an adult, then he can't use the echolalia. And that's part of the training before you do the teaching, that you get him to inhibit the echolalia. And you can do it by a number of ways. Sometimes you can do it just by taking the child's hands and looking at him sternly, and he starts echoing, and then he gets a little more uncomfortable because you're still looking at him, and you still look, and then he stops, and you say, great, now you can go. So as soon as you get the response you want, you let the child go. So he gets the message, gee, all I have to do is do what she wants. And so you've got to get the, if the echolalia is interfering with the teaching behavior, you've got to get it under control first. I had one mother who wrote that her child is scripting during ASD reading. You cannot be scripting because you won't be attending. So the scripting has to stop before the teaching.
Okay, got it. Okay. I'm not sure what this is. What do you think about verbal behavior approach? Do you know?
That's basically an ABA type approach.
Oh, it's an ABA.
I think didn't know the particular one that this person mentioned, but it's very artificial language that has. Now, this is a difficulty. There are many children today being called autistic who are not autistic. There's terrible misdiagnosis going on. And if a child is not autistic, he's going to learn quite well with other techniques too, because children who are not autistic do a lot of what's called going beyond the information given. But if a child is autistic, ABA language is very restrictive. And it doesn't teach, it doesn't generalize to everyday language, so that you end up with a very restricted language system.
Okay. Can I do ASD speaking sounds and ASD unlocking language, the receptive language part at the same time?
Yes, but the beginning part, for children who don't speak, we even sell the beginning part separately, calling pre-speaking cognition, or I can't remember the exact, it's called the pre-speaking program. It's right there. So you can easily do the pre-speaking program and ASD unlocking, ASD speaking sounds. That's fine.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. I think we've got everybody. Let me see if there's anything I might have missed that was asked before. Oh, is everything, it says, are all the steps we've been talking about in the books or the program, or has everything been fully incorporated into one of the online programs?
Every program is somewhat different. Spectacular Bond is, I'd like to eventually, we're hoping to make a series of videotapes which illustrates it. Right now, everything is just written out in the book, but it is a pretty comprehensive setup of how you structure the day and how you interact. Then everything else, each program has all its components in the program. There is no need for the parent to understand any of why anything is in the program. It's just, I think, helpful to understand it. So that, for example, I mentioned this, I think, a while back, one of the big components in ASD reading is teaching of the past tense. It's also a very big part of unlocking language. If you cannot speak in the past tense, you don't have access to a real language system for communication, okay? So now parents don't have to know this, but when they hear it and understand it, they say, wow, that does make sense. So understanding is very soothing. And I try and explain, we try to put in all the explanations for everything, but it's a lot. Unfortunately, the field has been very lax in giving parents good information. And I'm really trying, to the degree possible, to give parents the best possible information so that they can understand what's happening in a program. When I recently spoke to a woman whose child has been in verbal approximations. That means, say mommy, he goes muh, and say go, he goes He's been in verbal approximations for 6 years. And I don't want any parent to ever go into agree. I want them to know that staying 6 years in verbal approximations is a very unsatisfactory, non-productive route. To the degree that parents can become discerning consumers, it will help them and it'll help the children. And I'm trying to do, any feedback people want to send as to what will make things easier for them, I'd appreciate. It would be great.
No, in fact, that was one of the things we did want to ask, that if anybody has any additional information or that they would like to have that would be helpful, if there might be some other ways that we could be of use and help to you, just write to us at help@testingmom.com, and you can put, put in the subject line, unlocking autism question, and we'll or comment, and we'll take it and take a look at it. So we would appreciate that. And I just want to say thank you to Dr. Blank for helping us through. We've gone through 5 sessions. This has been extremely helpful. Everybody, if you just go to testingmom.com/classes, this webinar and all the others will be there, and we will be shortly putting everything up on YouTube as well. On the Testing Mom site, you'll be able to download the presentation, all the resources that are there. They're all listed. You can reach out to Dr. Blank. I've in fact, if anybody wants to reach out to Dr. Blank, here is how you get a consultation right here. And you could talk about your individual situation if that's something you would like to do. But the beauty of, I think, the program is the fact that it really can be done on your own. That's what I love about everything you put together, because you've worked very hard to create materials that parents can read through and follow the instructions, or just go online and start the program, and it just takes you through it, which is a big benefit. And it doesn't take hours and hours and hours of time, which I think is great as well. So anyway, so thank you all for being here, and we really appreciate it. And anything else you want to say, Dr. Blank, that we haven't said, or that you want to sort of end on, a message for parents?
No, I think they are amazing people. I think the challenges they have faced are just unbelievable. Their commitment to their children is beyond belief. And I would like to give them, I'm a parent. I know how hard it can be to be a parent. My goal is to make their lives and their children's lives as fruitful and as easy as possible. And it gives me enormous pleasure when I can help a child be successful. It really, it's just fabulous. And it's funny because very often I'd get discouraged because the work has been controversial. It's people complain, and my husband would say, if something from the Bible, that if you've helped one soul, it's as if you've saved the world. So we've been able to save a few souls, and that's been very rewarding, and I hope we can save a few more.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thanks to all the parents who have been here. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.